First things first, and we welcome in Yahoo Sports writer Chris Mammox live from Los Angeles. Chris, thanks for waking up early for us.
My pleasure, guys. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good to see you, Chris. Appreciate you, man.
We heard that you and Nick shouldn't be in the same place.
No,
keep
that's
you separated
not it at all.
for a while.
We're good friends. He's just wrong a lot. It's not his
No,
fault.
it's just over one topic that he would have been wrong about, but something changed. I mean, we don't need to go back. We don't need to go back down that rabbit hole.
Woulda, shouldas. All right. We're going to talk Warriors here, though, and even though they're second in the Western Conference, still overwhelming favorites to win the NBA championship at 5-9 odds. The Rockets are behind them at 7-2 with the Cavs at 6-1. Chris, can anyone challenge the Warriors?
You know, Sarah, that was a big topic of conversation out here in L.A. this week. Are the Warriors vulnerable? Is this a year that Houston could take them on? And I think the feeling I got talking to players, former players, coaches, is that people want to believe in the Houston Rockets. They want to believe that this is the Rockets' year. They look at all the numbers. Top 10 in defense for the first time in a long time. A defensive mindset, particularly when talking about the guys coming off the bench. An offensive option in Chris Paul opposite James Harden that's going to take a lot of pressure off him. But ultimately, in these conversations, it circles back to the idea that how do you beat Golden State 4 out of 7? And you have to acknowledge the fact that right now the Warriors are basically going through the motions. They are indifferent to where they're at this moment in the regular season. So when the Warriors turn it up a gear, which they will when they get to the playoffs, can Houston hang with that Golden State team? Still a lot of skeptics about that.
Chris, I remember people talking about a three-time finals, I guess they were a three-time defending champ, but it seemed they were in 3 straight finals, just going through the motions. They were going to turn it up a gear. And that was the Los Angeles Lakers in 2002. And they got beat in the conference semifinals. Why? Because they didn't have an extra year to go to. Then they ended up in the following year, they got back to the finals. They got beat that year as well. Like, do you have any level of concern that the Warriors don't actually have another gear, that the Warriors haven't just been worn down by the 3 straight 100-game seasons?
Look, I think there's certainly merit to that argument, especially when you throw in the fact that some of these guys over the last few years have also played USA basketball, and that adds another layer of fatigue onto them. But I have to look at the ages of these guys, and I have to look at the chemistry of the players on this team and all the non-issues that exist between them. They're just having a hard time getting up for, a February game against the Phoenix Suns. I think when you get into March, this team is really going to turn it up a notch. I think they're going to enter the playoffs on one of those 10-game winning streaks, 11 out of 13, 15 out of 17. I think they're going to go into the playoffs with a lot of momentum. If they are struggling, or if they are playing like they're even playing now going into the playoffs, then I think we can address points of concern. But right now, I just look at where these guys are, and frankly, the hunger that several of these players still are. I mean, Kevin Durant has his ring, but Kevin Durant's there for 2 rings, 3 rings, 4 rings. He's got a little bit more hunger maybe than some of the other guys on that group.
You talk about Kevin Durant. We know Draymond will be motivated. Steph will be motivated. But it's the role players that concern us. Is it age, lack of interest? Iguodala, is he still the player? Shooting the worst, Nick pointed that out, the worst 3-point shooter in the NBA. Sean Livingston, does he give you that advantage with that second unit? And David West, as the years caught up with him? Because those would be concerns that people that are looking at the Warriors and looking beyond their starting 5.
Yeah, it's age and it's youth, really, with some of the guys they'll have coming off the bench, presumably in the playoffs. West and of course, Iguodala, they've regressed a little bit, particularly Iguodala, who can't make a shot right now. And that might continue going into the playoffs. The bench guys, the McCaws, maybe Jordan Bell when you get to the postseason, they have had very little experience at this level. One thing I would caution towards is that when you talk to executives out here in L.A., there's a game of chicken going on right now amongst some players and their teams when it comes to the buyout market. Remember, the trade deadline was earlier this year. So we saw the first flurry of players, the Joe Johnsons, the Marco Bellinellis. Those guys get bought out immediately. I think there's going to be a second wave of players that comes before March 1st that gets bought out. And I think Golden State's going to be first in line for one of those players. I mean, right now, teams are saying, look, we're not going to give you, you're going to have to take a lot of money off the top for us to give you a buyout. The player's going, no, I'm not going to give that. those attitudes change when you get to February 25th, 26th. So I think that's going to be a factor.
That you're even mentioning that, though, speaks to me to the difference between Golden State this year and years past. There's not been a single meaningful player that the Warriors have added through buyouts or at the trade deadline, for that matter, in the last 3 years when they've been the best team in the league. We've seen other teams do it. The Cavs have remade their roster, added players every year. We saw Houston this year. We've seen other teams do it. We haven't seen the Warriors do it. But I want to talk about the Rockets for a second. 28-1, Mammox. That's them with Chris Paul, Harden, and Capella starting. That is not a small sample size. That is more than a third of the season. That's a real number. Another real number is this. They have the best offensive efficiency in the history of the sport, according to Basketball Reference. The best offense we've ever seen. Better than last year's Golden State offense. Certainly better than this year's Golden State offense. Like, let's say the Warriors do have another gear. Could it still be, even if they have another gear, that the Rockets play their best, they can beat them?
I think that's true. Like, that the Rockets can beat anybody on a given night, but can they take 4 out of the 7? I mean, look, my blind faith in Golden State's ability to turn it up and to play at a higher level, kind of mirrors your once blind faith in the Cleveland Cavaliers and their ability to turn it up in some way on the next level. I think Golden State, when they get to the playoffs, you're going to have Durant playing like an MVP, Curry playing like an MVP. That defense is going to go to another level. And I'll tell you, I do wonder what that Rockets defense looks like in the postseason. Will Mike D'Antoni trust the Mbah Moutes and the P.J. Tuckers to play consistent minutes in the postseason? Because if they're not a top 10 level defense, they are not beating Golden State.
Chris, we had talked about that earlier. How much with D'Antoni's system do you think can translate into the playoffs?
I think it translates well. I mean, look, the criticism of Mike D'Antoni I never really understood. I mean, Robert Horry doesn't hip check Steve Nash, and he's got a championship on his belt. I mean, that's kind of just the way it goes with Mike D'Antoni. I understand that, in New York, the defenses were terrible. In Phoenix, they were terrible. In Houston, they haven't been very good. But this year, he's got a high-level defense. And Mike D'Antoni's offenses have always held up well in the postseason. He's just gone up against a San Antonio Spurs or some other high-level team in the playoffs. So I think this is a great opportunity for Mike to have his whole philosophy on coaching be somewhat vindicated out there.
Mammox, you're out west. We're going to keep our eyes on the west for one more question. We talk about Houston and Golden State. Can they beat them in 7 games? Is there any storyline coming out of the All-Star game about one of the other teams in the West? Have you heard about Kawhi potentially coming back? Or is there an early round matchup that you fear could hinder Golden State's run at an unprecedented 3 out of 4 championships?
Not really. Not when it comes to those first-round matchups. I mean, it's a battle for the 8th seed right now in the West. I mean, Utah's one of the best stories in basketball right now with how they've played with all the injuries. Donovan Mitchell is probably the biggest star of the weekend out here in L.A. for the dunk contest, piggybacked onto what he's done with the Utah Jazz up until that point. But really, it's just look, honestly, the last few days, one of the biggest storylines has been Paul George and what happens to him, next year. Out here in L.A., a lot of people clamoring, cheering for Paul George, saying, come to L.A. You had Russell Westbrook have to react to it on the practice floor, saying, no, it's a wrap. Paul George isn't going anywhere. So everybody spent the last few days kind of reading the tea leaves on Paul George of what he says and how he feels about Los Angeles and, of course, Oklahoma City.
All right, we've spent this whole segment talking about the Warriors' competition in the West. You now acknowledge what has been true all year, that in the finals, whomever comes out of the West will be playing Cleveland. You were here last week right after the trades, before we had seen the Oklahoma City game against the Cavs, and you were still very skeptical about if the Cavs could compete at all with Golden State in the finals. Where do you stand on that now?
No, I still don't see it. I mean, look, it's going to be a dogfight for Golden State this year, maybe more than other years in getting through these rounds. I don't think either team, Cleveland or Golden State, has a 15-1, a 16-0 type of postseason. That's just not in the cards for either team this year. But I don't know. I mean, I can expect or count on a Rodney Hood, Jordan Clarkson, George Hill to be factors against Boston and Toronto and teams that are on that second tier of level. But against Golden State, I mean, can George Hill really match up with Curry or Thompson? Can, Rodney Hood and Clarkson in their first big extended playoff runs, can they, will they not be affected by the lights? I mean, I just don't see it. I mean, LeBron James, and look, again, your unflinching faith in LeBron James, Nick, never ceased to disappoint me. But LeBron James would have to play, 7 consecutive games of his life, 7 of the best games he's ever played, to even give them a chance against Golden State. And I just don't see that happening.
All right, Chris. Well, we appreciate your time so very much, and we're going to have to stick around because we want to ask you about the new format of the All-Star Game and if it saved us. That's next on First Things First.
Man, it's the best. We're just not talking about the Celtics. We're talking about the Celtics.